You probably shouldn't learn Japanese. Okay, that's a bit too direct and leaves out a lot of nuance, so let's rephrase that, shall we? You probably shouldn't aim to learn Japanese over other languages. That doesn't sound good either. Oh, fuck it, I'll just make a 20+ minute long video about it. Japanese is, for English speakers, one of the hardest languages on the planet to learn and vice versa. For starters, you need to learn not just 3 types of alphabet, but different rules of how to pronounce each word depending on what level of society the person you are talking to is on. It is also just not worth dedicating so much time in your life to learning this language when there are so many other, arguably more important languages you can learn, such as French, Spanish, or German. And if you want a challenge for a very difficult language, then choose Mandarin or Arabic, because you will get so much more out of learning the language of the CCP rather than the language of a country that for the longest time never gave a flying shit about the rest of the world. Okay, I am being a bit extreme here. Obviously, Japanese isn't as painful as getting your nuts twisted, but you can get what I mean. As someone who has studied the language both inside traditional schools with other materials, it is extremely hard and generally not worth the effort you put into it. However, this small rant about this language is not going to discourage the average weeb that believes that Japanese women throw themselves at foreigners because their hair and skin are white from trying to learn this language. So I'm going to go through some reasons and examples for why you probably don't want to study Japanese. However, that's not to say that choosing to learn this language is a bad thing. Even wanting to learn a new language different from your native tongue is already awesome, and even choosing to learn such a difficult language such as Japanese goes to show how dedicated you are. Learning a new language is such a good and rewarding experience regardless of how hard or little spoken the language is. I'm just trying to say that if you want to learn a language, Japanese should probably not be your first choice. So let's get into it, shall we? First of all, Japanese is extremely hard. You probably knew that already, but it is something on a whole other level when compared with other languages. Now, you have probably heard some people saying that Japanese has 3 writing systems or 3 alphabets. That is sort of true, but it's a bit misleading. First of all, yes, Japanese does use 3 alphabets: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. However, it's not like these alphabets are all distinct from one another and are completely independent. They are just different ways of writing the same words. Hiragana is mainly used for everyday words in language, katakana for names or foreign borrowed words known as gairaigo, and kanji for, well, everything else. If you stripped away all the fancy lines, then you would still be left with using the same basic sounds you find in hiragana. And here's the thing, if you really wanted to, which I personally would not recommend, you technically only need to learn hiragana. Sure, using kanji would make your writing and reading much faster, and katakana would make it easier to differentiate between foreign and local words, but generally, you could get away with only writing in hiragana, and most people would be able to read what you said. The only thing is they'll think that you're a child. And learning katakana and hiragana is easy enough. Honestly, you could probably learn both alphabets in 2 weeks if you are really trying to learn as much as possible. To be honest, there are a lot of Japanese people who don't even use some of the kanji, as it is just easier to use hiragana. However, these 3 alphabets aren't the only trifecta in Japanese. Normally in Japanese classes in the West, they will probably first teach you teinego, or polite speech. This is where you learn things like des, mas, gomennasai, and other forms of polite language. And this is mainly used when you are addressing strangers, colleagues, and other people you don't have important connections with. Perfect for foreigners to learn first, because with this style, you will at least never really offend anyone by using the wrong kind of politeness. Then we go up a level to sonkeigo. This is the super mega evolution of polite language. You know when you see Japanese people apologizing by literally laying face down on the ground? This is the form of language they would be speaking. Mainly it is used when you want to elevate the position of the listener, traditionally your boss or someone in a high position of power, such as a customer of your shop. Though as a foreigner, you needn't worry about learning this kind of language until you are minimum N2, because the fact you are a foreigner speaking Japanese is generally more than enough. And for the last form of polite language, we have kenjogo. This is similar to sonkeigo, but instead of elevating the listener, you lower yourself instead. Humble speak. It is generally used in the same context as sonkeigo, where you will only really use it in business and apology videos. However, even though that's the 3 most well-known forms of the language, honestly, out of these 3, you only really need to know teinego and another 4th kind of speaking. All of these forms of language have been super polite, where you avoid making any attacks on the other person, treating the conversation as sacred. However, you probably want to learn what type of language people in anime typically speak, because only really flwrz uses perfect teinego. This fourth style is known as casual form, or tamaguchi or futstai, with this one used for speaking with friends or family. This is the one you generally hear the most of in anime, and why learning Japanese from anime is so stupidly hard. It's because of this language. Because for the other polite forms, sure they are annoying to switch between, but they generally use the same form such as des and mas, just with much longer words. However, casual form completely changes how you have to use the words and what order to use them. Words like tabemasu become taberu, des becomes just da, and the language becomes, I shit you not, mostly vibes based. So instead of saying, kyou wa tottemo atsui desu, in casual, you can get away with just saying, atsui na, just the word hot, because most people you are using casual form with are going to understand that you are referring to the temperature of the weather and not your sweaty nuts. And that brings me to the next point. Japanese was never meant to be a perfectly simple and analytical language. It is not a language that has been optimized to make every conversation a perfect replication of the dictionary. It is, and always has been, vibes-based, to put it lightly. And for English speakers, this is incredibly hard to wrap your head around, because a lot of the time in Japanese, when you are talking about someone or something, you only have to refer to it once or insinuate what you are talking about. So if you're talking about how beautiful the Kanazawa Maeda Clan garden is, you don't say, "Oh, Tanaka-san, kono niwa ga utsukushii desho?" If you are quite literally in it and walking around it, you can just say, "Utsukushii na," and just trail off. Tanaka-san is going to perfectly understand you. If you are hungry, you needn't say, Satoshi-san, watashi no onaka ga suita kara nanka tabetai da. Instead, just say, Satoshi-san, onaka suita. Because Satoshi is going to understand that you are referring to your own stomach being hungry and not his or the other people walking around. It's quite obvious that you are referring to yourself. And this is quite hard for learners of the language to get a grip on. We are so used as English speakers to make sure that there is no confusion in the interpretation of our words. So a language where you can use a single word as an entire sentence is incredibly hard for us to learn. It's actually a sign that you are a beginner in the language. Most people will be able to tell that you are only just learning the language if you come out and use the full watashi desu. However, you don't feel bad about it. Most Japanese people understand that learning their language this way is extremely difficult for foreigners, so don't feel bad if you can't speak the way they do. You are still learning, and they can understand that. After all, most of them have learned a bit of English in school, so they will understand how difficult it is to learn a language so vastly different from your own. However, this is probably not even the hardest part of the language. Not even close. That prize goes to kanji. Kanji, if you couldn't tell, are Chinese characters brought over around the 5th and 7th centuries. They are, other than hiragana, the most common type of writing there is in everyday Japanese life. In fact, most parts of the language are written in kanji, so they are practically a requirement to learn if you ever want to live in Japan. However, they are one of the most annoying parts of the language. There is so much about them that is just plain stupid that they are probably the reason most people quit learning this language. First of all, since they are originally Chinese, these characters are originally images that describe what they are. So moku is a tree because it looks like a tree. Ki is fire because it looks like fire. However, Japan decided to do something incredibly stupid. You know how when a language borrows a word, it either replaces one or becomes its own new separate word? Well, Japan decided that these kanji are so cool that they decided to use the original Chinese reading and a new Japanese reading and also entirely different readings for names. They are called onyumi, kunyumi, and nanori. So a single kanji can at minimum have 3 entire readings, all of which can also mean different things. Well, not entirely different, but different enough. So for example, this kanji for big has the Chinese pronunciation dai and the Japanese pronunciation or, with both of these being used for big in daisuki and oki. Or if you're one of these bitches, you can have as many different fucking readings as you want. That's why it is said that kanji makes reading both extremely hard and easy at the same time. Look at this sentence in hiragana. What do you think it says? Well, it says my mum is fast. Sure, it's a stupid sentence, but it's grammatically correct. But do you think you would have guessed what it meant from the hiragana alone? Definitely not. This hiragana itself also has a different reading from its original one. This is normally ha, but in this context, it is wa. I don't know fucking why. But if we add kanji into it, now you can actually tell what words are what. So kanji can be used to make it easier to read the language. But now, let's look at this sentence. This sentence uses the kanji for the sun 9 times, and practically all of them are read differently and have different meanings. How would you know that? I don't know, and that's the worst part about learning kanji. It is almost impossible to guess what the reading for a specific kanji is that you have never seen before. You could guess what the meaning of the kanji is, because most kanji actually just use smaller kanji or radicals to make up new kanji, which can give you a clue as to what it means, like woman, child, woman and child together, love, child and a roof, learn, woman and a roof, cheap, Anyway, for most kanji, it is going to require good old-fashioned brute force to learn all the kanji for fluency, and that's going to take a very long time. Japanese is one of, if not the language with the most amount of learning required to master it. The thumbnail probably told you, but I have been studying this language for the last 4 years, both in actual school courses offered by the government and external private methods such as basic vocab learning with Duolingo and kanji practice sites. And after all that, I still think I'm only N4. Japanese, along with languages like Mandarin and Arabic, take around 2,200 hours on average to completely master the language. Like, I studied around 3 to 3.5 hours a week on this language, and doing a few quick calculations, I am only a fucking quarter done with this language. There is a reason that around 87% of learners quit trying to learn the language. Compared to something like French, if I had decided to learn that instead of Japanese, I would probably be very much fluent in the language right now. In fact, I know I would be, because at the same time as learning Japanese, I was also learning Dutch. And after literally half the amount of time, and only doing basic study through Duolingo and other things, I now feel as if I am on the same level of proficiency as my Japanese. I know that for a fact as well, because I fucking live in the Netherlands, and I have never had a problem or a big one with my Dutch. But if I went to Japan right now, sure, it'd be a much smoother experience than someone with no experience in the language, but I definitely would not feel as confident as I do with my Dutch. And the thing is, with Japanese, you never stop learning the language. It is a never-ending hole that you will never stop going down. Sure, you can do those 2,200 hours if you are extremely dedicated, and you could learn the entire language in a single year, studying 4 hours a day, but even after all that, there will always be something else to learn. It is the language that is, but wait, there is more. And for a language that is so difficult, why would you even want to learn it? Generally, learning a new language opens many doors for you in life. You can work in many more jobs and places, improving your employability to companies. You get to interact with more people and cultures all over the world if you learn French or Spanish, and you can even reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. I'm not kidding, this is real. But for Japanese, there just isn't that much incentive to learn the language. Sure, it is cool and fun to learn, but what are you really going to get out of it when compared to others? Japanese is practically exclusively spoken only in Japan, with very rarely any other opportunities to use it outside of Japan. Then, employability in Japanese companies, as you can probably tell, is very hard for foreigners to do, and not something you would want to do even. So you can't really use the language inside of actual Japanese companies as often as other countries. And the amount of effort you put into the language is not worth the reward you get when compared to other languages you could learn. If you want to travel around the world and converse with as many people as possible, learn Spanish or Arabic. If you want to be able to work with high-level companies and translate them, then learn something like Chinese or German. If you want a language to impress your friends at a party, learn something easy like Dutch or a language from your local area, such as a traditional people's language. Japanese is not a language that will give you a lot in return. However, that's not to say that learning Japanese is a bad thing at all. In fact, it is one of the best things you can do. The fact that you are learning a new language is already going to give you most of the benefits I explained before, even if it is Japanese. I myself am happy that I am learning Japanese. There is no other language that I would want to learn other than Japanese at the moment, apart from Dutch. And even though I don't recommend Japanese as a language to learn, that doesn't mean I'm saying it is a bad language to learn. I have never regretted my choice of learning Japanese over other languages, and all of this rambling to show that this language is not worth learning is definitely not going to deter some of you. And no matter what I say, you probably want to learn it anyway, even with the 87% failure rate. So I'll give you some tips on how to learn this language. Firstly, you must have a fucking good reason for learning it, or have the motivation of Denji to get some pussy. Because the hardest thing about learning Japanese is keeping the motivation alive. Most of the reasons I stated before are going to start creeping into your head, dissuading you from wanting to learn this language. So in order to keep powering on, you are going to need a very good reason for continuing. And wanting to watch anime without the subtitles is not one of them. That is not a good enough reason, because the amount of learning it takes to understand the language used in anime is the same as an 18-year-old Japanese high school student. So unless you have been learning since you were born, anime is not going to cut it. The reason I continued learning the language was because the teachers I had in school were the coolest people on the planet. Like my first Japanese teacher was a guy that didn't even feel like a teacher. He felt like just an awesome dude teaching Japanese rather than a Japanese teacher. And after he left, I had already made some Japanese friends, so now I would just want to continue so I can speak with them better. So reasons like family, job, or having the strongest motivation in the fucking world are good enough reasons for this. Secondly, do not only use one method of learning the language. This goes for every other language, but doing a single lesson a day on Duolingo, especially for Japanese, and nothing else is not going to get you results. In fact, Duolingo is the last program I would personally recommend for Japanese. You need to learn Japanese from as many different methods as you can. So doing an actual school course is one of them, but then doing something else as well. Try to learn vocab from a Japanese dictionary. Try to get into speaking conventions or Japanese learning discords where you can practice speaking the language and immerse yourself as much as you can in the language. Most people who are learning Japanese probably are watching anime as well, and that is a good way to immerse yourself. But don't just do that as the type of immersion. Read Japanese text if you want. Listen to the language, either through music or from straight news broadcasts. And the best way to immerse yourself, of course, is to move to Japan, but that's stupid. Consume as much Japanese material as you can, so you can force yourself to learn as much as you can. Thirdly, do not treat language learning as learning a new job or a new skill. Language learning can't be done efficiently by only doing long marathons of learning. You can't just learn for 1 hour on a single day every week. That is incredibly inefficient. Your brain is not going to retain all of that hour-long knowledge, and by the time you get to the next day a week later, you will have to spend most of your time revising what you learned last time. It will significantly hamper how quickly you can learn the language. Instead of learning for 1 hour on a single day every week, learn for only 10 minutes every day. This helps mainly with retention, as you will remember what you learn much easier, as instead of only stimulating and learning once a week, you stimulate it every day, sort of like with building muscle, because if you go to the gym every day for only 10 minutes, it's going to give you better results than going to the gym for 3 days straight for 24 hours each in those days. You're going to get destroyed. Then you'll also want to learn it more, as you can learn much faster for 10 minutes rather than for a whole hour. And it generally gives you much more flexibility of when you want to do it. You can sit down and properly study with a bunch of books, or you can pull out some flashcards while you're waiting in a line. Also, this is probably one of the only good things you could use Duolingo for actually, because just doing 5-minute bursts of Japanese knowledge is a good thing as well. You can just hop in for 10 minutes and learn something small instead of doing something big every so often. Fourthly, this one's going to be a bit weird and a bit controversial, but if you're having difficulty pronouncing some of the words, I shit you not, just pretend you have a Japanese accent and pronounce them like that. A lot of words in Japanese were borrowed from English, but they've been pronounced Japanese-like. So toilet becomes toeru. And it might seem a bit funny, but it actually genuinely helps. So if you're struggling with pronouncing words, just put on a Japanese accent. It also makes it easier for the other person to understand you, especially a Japanese person, because Japanese people, when speaking in English, are generally going to understand all of your English speaking in one massive word. They're not going to hear "where is the station" as "where is the station." They're going to hear it as "where's the station," like one big word. So putting on a Japanese accent can make it a bit easier for them to understand it as well. And I know this sounds really bad, but a lot of people give this advice. Finally, make sure you are having fun. Anytime you are learning a language just for the shits of it, or you aren't in any rush to become fluent, make sure you are at least enjoying yourself. because forcing yourself to learn a language that you are becoming frustrated with will only worsen how well you can learn it, and the more frustrated you become, the worse you will get at learning it. So if you are getting annoyed by it or feel like you aren't going anywhere, literally take a break. It could be for a single day or it could be for multiple months, because forcing yourself to learn something you don't feel like learning is not going to make the process faster or get it over and done with faster. You will actually just get even slower and slower, especially with languages. So, should you learn Japanese? If you have the reasons and the motivation, I don't see why you shouldn't learn it. It is an incredibly fun and rewarding language to learn, and something you will have for the rest of your life. But if you want to learn another language, be it for clout or for job opportunities, maybe choose something else. As I said, Japanese is way too hard and not worth the effort, but if you want to put in that effort, go straight ahead, champion.